morning sun was shining through the windows of Lincoln Elementary School, painting the classroom walls with warm golden light. The sound of children's laughter filled the hallways as students rushed to their classes, carrying their backpacks stuffed with books, pencils, and little snacks hidden inside. Inside room 5B, things were just beginning to settle down. The smell of chalk dust and freshly sharpened pencils mixed with the faint scent of the floor cleaner the janitor had used earlier that morning. Jamal, a 10-year-old boy with bright eyes and a shy smile, quietly took his seat near the back of the classroom. He was always early, because his mother believed punctuality showed discipline. Jamal liked to sit near the back not because he was lazy or uninterested, but because he enjoyed observing everything. He loved to watch how his classmates interacted, how the teacher explained things, and how the sunlight slowly moved across the floor during the day. The classroom was buzzing with chatter. A group of girls in the front whispered excitedly about the new TV show they had watched the night before. Two boys in the middle row were arguing about who was the better basketball player, LeBron James or Stephen Curry. The noise was ordinary, the kind of sound that meant life was normal and school was in full swing. The teacher, Ms. Parker, walked into the room holding a stack of papers. She was strict but clever, the type who believed discipline was the key to success. Her glasses rested on the edge of her nose, and she had a habit of looking over them whenever she was annoyed. The class quickly grew quiet as she placed the papers on her desk, ready to begin the day's lesson. "Good morning, class," Ms. Parker said firmly. "Good morning, Ms. Parker," the children echoed back in unison. The lesson began as usual. She wrote math problems on the board, and the students pulled out their notebooks. Some scribbled quickly, while others stared blankly, trying to figure out what the numbers meant. Jamal, however, was focused. Math was one of his favorite subjects. He liked the way numbers always had answers, clear and fair, unlike people who sometimes judged without understanding. As the morning moved along, the atmosphere in the room felt calm and ordinary. But beneath the routine, there was something special about Jamal that not everyone knew. He carried a quiet pride within him, a pride about his family. His father worked hard every single day, doing something very important, something that made Jamal feel like the son of a hero. He wanted to share it with the world, but he had learned that not everyone listened with kindness. Still, he believed one day the truth would matter. During a short break before the next lesson, the children began chatting again. Some talked about their parents' jobs. One girl said her mom was a nurse and helped deliver babies. Another boy boasted that his father owned a car dealership and always brought home different vehicles to test drive. Laughter and stories filled the air, and soon all eyes turned toward Jamal. One of his classmates nudged him and asked, "Hey Jamal, what does your dad do?" The question was innocent, but everyone leaned in, curious. Jamal hesitated for a moment, looking down at his notebook. He knew the truth, but he also knew that sometimes when he said it, people didn't believe him. Taking a deep breath, he looked up with courage shining in his eyes. The room had no idea that in just a few seconds, something small would happen that would eventually change everyone's day, especially the teachers. For now, though, the classroom was just a normal place, filled with pencils scratching, children whispering, and the promise of another story waiting to unfold. Jamal smiled faintly, deciding that today he would answer honestly, no matter the reaction. He wanted his classmates to know the truth about his father, because he was proud of it, even if others found it hard to believe. The morning might have seemed ordinary, but what Jamal was about to say would make this school day unforgettable. The bell rang softly, signaling the end of the short break. Students shuffled in their seats, some still whispering and giggling, while others tried to look busy by pretending to write in their notebooks. The classroom buzzed with the same restless energy that always filled the air when children had too much to say and too little time to say it. Jamal sat quietly at his desk, tapping his pencil lightly against the corner of his math book. His classmates' words replayed in his mind. "What does your dad do?" It was such a simple question, yet for him it carried so much weight. He felt a mix of pride and nervousness. Pride because he adored his father and admired what he did. Nervousness because he knew people often doubted him whenever he shared the truth. The conversation had started casually, like any other day. A boy named Trevor had bragged about his father working at a car dealership, boasting that he got to ride in a new car almost every week. A girl named Lila chimed in about her mother, a nurse who had stayed up all night delivering babies. The other students listened with wide eyes, impressed and curious. Then, almost naturally, the circle of attention shifted toward Jamal. "Come on, Jamal," another boy teased. "Don't act shy. What does your dad do? He probably works at a grocery store or something." Jamal raised his eyes slowly, his heart thumping in his chest. He thought about his father that morning, dressed in a neat suit, carefully adjusting his tie before leaving the house. He thought about the stories his father sometimes told in hushed tones, about chasing dangerous criminals, protecting innocent lives, and standing tall for justice. These weren't the kind of things most children could say about their fathers. Jamal wanted so badly to share it, to let the world know how proud he was. Taking a deep breath, Jamal straightened his back. His voice was soft but steady as he said, "My dad is an FBI agent." The words hung in the air like a spark waiting to ignite. For a split second, there was silence. Some children's eyes widened in surprise, while others tilted their heads, unsure if he was serious. Then came the laughter. A few students chuckled at first, and within seconds the giggles spread like wildfire. "An FBI agent?" Trevor laughed loudly. "Yeah, right."
"And my dad is Superman,"
another boy added. "That's the funniest thing I've heard all week." The mocking voices grew louder, echoing in Jamal's ears. His cheeks burned with embarrassment, but inside he clung to the truth. His father really was an FBI agent, and nothing they said could change that. Still, it hurt to be laughed at, especially when he had only spoken with honesty and pride. At the front of the classroom, Ms. Parker paused her writing on the board. She turned around slowly, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "What's going on back there?" she asked, her tone sharp and impatient. Trevor quickly spoke up. "Ms. Parker, you won't believe what Jamal just said. He says his dad is some kind of FBI agent." His words were dripping with sarcasm, and once again the class erupted into laughter. Ms. Parker raised an eyebrow and looked directly at Jamal. Her lips curved into a thin, amused smile. "An FBI agent, Jamal?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "Really? Is that the story you're going with today?" Jamal's stomach tightened. He had hoped the teacher would support him, maybe even scold the students for laughing. Instead, she was joining them. He could feel the eyes of the entire class piercing into him, waiting to see what he would say. His throat felt dry, but he managed to whisper, "Yes, ma'am. My dad really is an FBI agent." Ms. Parker chuckled, shaking her head as if she had just heard the most ridiculous thing in the world. "Jamal, it's important to be honest. There's no need to make up stories to impress people. We all know parents work hard, but let's try to stick to the truth, all right?" The class burst into laughter again, even louder this time, because now they felt they had the teacher's permission. Jamal lowered his gaze, staring at the lines in his notebook. His chest ached, and he wished he hadn't said anything. All he had wanted was to share something he was proud of. Instead, he had become the target of ridicule. Inside, though, a small flame of courage still burned. He knew who his father was, and he knew the truth didn't change just because people refused to believe it. But the weight of humiliation pressed heavily on him, and he stayed silent for the rest of the lesson. As the laughter died down and the classroom returned to its routine, Ms. Parker carried on as if nothing had happened. To her, it was just another silly moment, another child telling tall tales. But to Jamal, it was something much deeper. It was the sting of being doubted, the pain of being ridiculed, and the heavy reminder that sometimes people judged without knowing. The rest of the students went back to their lessons, but every now and then Jamal could hear them whispering and snickering. "FBI agent," one of them muttered under his breath, followed by a chuckle. Jamal clenched his fists under his desk, forcing himself not to respond. What none of them knew, neither the students nor Ms. Parker, was that later that very day, the truth would walk through the classroom door, and when it did, the laughter would stop, the smirks would vanish, and the teacher herself would learn a lesson she would never forget. The classroom had returned to its rhythm after the short outburst of laughter, but the mood had shifted. The chalk squeaked against the board as Ms. Parker wrote out another set of math problems, yet Jamal barely noticed the numbers anymore. His mind was still stuck on what had just happened. Every few seconds, a quiet chuckle or whisper reminded him that his words were still being mocked. Ms. Parker cleared her throat and turned back to the class, brushing chalk dust from her hands. "All right, class. Eyes on the board. Let's solve this together." Her tone was sharp, as though nothing had happened, but her eyes drifted back toward Jamal. She adjusted her glasses and sighed loudly. the way she always did when she was annoyed. "Jamal?" she called out suddenly, making the boy jump. His pencil slipped from his fingers and rolled off his desk. "Since you seem so eager to tell stories, maybe you'd like to solve the first problem on the board." A few students giggled again. Jamal swallowed hard, stood up and walked slowly to the front. His legs felt heavy, like each step was carrying the weight of every laugh and whisper behind him. He picked up the chalk with trembling fingers. The math problem was easy for him. He had solved dozens like it before, but as he wrote down the steps, he could feel Ms. Parker's eyes watching him with that same amused expression. When he finished, the answer was correct. He turned slightly, waiting for her approval. Ms. Parker gave a small nod, then smirked. "Well, at least your math is more believable than your stories." The class burst out laughing again, louder this time, filling the room with cruel echoes. Jamal froze, his heart sinking to the floor. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the walls where no one could see him. He clenched the chalk so tightly that a piece snapped in his hand, leaving a white streak of dust on his fingers. "Go sit down," Ms. Parker said, still smiling as though she had told the funniest joke of the day. To her it was harmless teasing. To Jamal it was another wound, another reminder that even the one person meant to protect him in class had joined in the ridicule. He walked back to his seat with his head lowered, feeling the sting of humiliation burn hotter with every step. When he sat down, he kept his eyes fixed on his notebook, refusing to look at anyone. "Why would he even make that up?" whispered a girl nearby, not bothering to lower her voice enough. "Maybe he just wants attention," another boy replied. "Nobody's dad is an FBI agent. That's like saying my uncle is the president." Jamal pressed his lips together and said nothing. Inside, his heart screamed. He wanted to shout that they were wrong, that his father had chased criminals, investigated serious cases, and protected people they would never even know about. He wanted to tell them how his father left home early, often returning late, exhausted but proud of the work he did. But he stayed silent, knowing that if he spoke again, they would only laugh harder. At the front of the room, Ms. Parker continued her lesson, her chalk dancing across the board as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. She had moved on, but the damage lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. Jamal's chest ached with each passing minute. For the rest of the class, Jamal didn't raise his hand, didn't make a sound, and didn't look up from his desk. He scribbled numbers into his notebook without caring if they were right or wrong. His mind was elsewhere, drifting between pride for his father and pain from the disbelief surrounding him. The classroom clock ticked slowly, dragging time forward. Each second felt like an eternity. When the final bell rang for lunch, the students jumped from their seats, laughing and chatting as they rushed toward the cafeteria. Jamal gathered his things carefully, waiting until most of them had left before he stood up. He didn't want to walk out with them. He didn't want to hear more whispers. Ms. Parker was still at her desk, flipping through papers. As Jamal passed, she looked up briefly and said in a low, almost patronizing tone, "Jamal, I don't know why you feel the need to make up stories. People will like you just fine if you're honest. Think about that, okay?" He froze for a moment, staring at her. He wanted to shout back, to say she was wrong, to demand that she believe him. But instead he nodded silently and walked out the door. His small shoulders drooped as though carrying a burden far too heavy for a boy his age. Down the hallway, he joined the stream of students heading to lunch. Some of them pointed at him and chuckled. "Hey, Agent Jamal," one of them called mockingly, pretending to salute. The group burst into laughter again. Jamal clenched his fists and walked faster, refusing to look back. What no one knew was that truth has a way of revealing itself. Sometimes it comes quietly. Sometimes it crashes in like a storm. For Jamal, the storm was already on its way, and it would soon shake the entire classroom, including Ms. Parker herself. She had mocked him, dismissed him, and humiliated him in front of everyone. But before the day ended, she would realize the weight of her mistake. The boy she had ridiculed was not a storyteller craving attention. He was the son of a man who carried both courage and responsibility every single day. A man who was about to step into her classroom and change everything. The lunchroom was buzzing with energy, the clatter of trays and the hum of voices filling the air. Children crowded around tables, trading snacks, swapping stories, and laughing about things only kids found funny. To anyone walking in, it looked like a perfectly ordinary school lunch period, but for Jamal it was anything but ordinary. He carried his tray quietly, his head lowered as he walked past groups of students who seemed louder than usual. Whispers followed him like shadows. A few boys near the milk station snickered, and one of them whispered loudly enough for him to hear, "There goes Agent Jamal." The others laughed, mimicking siren sounds as he passed by. Jamal gripped his tray tighter, his knuckles turning white. He fought the urge to respond. Deep down he wanted to shout, "It's true. My dad really is an FBI agent." But after the way Ms. Parker had mocked him in front of everyone, he knew it was useless. No one would believe him. At one table, a group of girls leaned in close, whispering with giggles. "Did you hear what Jamal said? His dad works for the FBI, can you imagine? That's like saying my dog is a police officer." Their laughter rang out, sharp and cruel, cutting straight into him. Jamal spotted an empty table near the corner and made his way there, keeping his eyes down. He sat alone, poking at his food without eating. The laughter around him grew louder in his mind, echoing over and over. He felt like the whole lunchroom was closing in on him, as if every single person was in on the joke. His best friend Marcus hesitated at another table. He looked torn, glancing between his group of friends and Jamal sitting alone. Marcus and Jamal had been close since first grade, sharing comic books and trading snacks. But now Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He didn't want to be laughed at too. After a moment he sighed and stayed where he was, choosing safety over loyalty. Jamal noticed, and the pain stung even deeper. Back in the classroom after lunch, the whispers continued. Ms. Parker gave instructions for the afternoon assignment, but the students weren't focused. Every so often a boy would make a joke, pretending to wear sunglasses and whisper into his collar like a secret agent. Another girl scribbled FBI on her notebook and flashed it at her friends, who stifled giggles. Jamal sat silently, staring at his textbook but not really reading. His ears burned with every snicker, every whisper, every sideways glance. The classroom that once felt like a place of learning now felt like a cage, trapping him in humiliation. At one point, Trevor leaned across the aisle and whispered just loud enough for others to hear, "Hey Jamal, when your dad comes home from the FBI office, does he fight aliens too?" The group around him erupted in laughter. Jamal clenched his jaw, trying to stay calm, but his fists curled under the desk. He wanted to scream. He wanted to cry. But most of all, he wanted them to stop doubting him. It wasn't fair. He had told the truth, and instead of respect, he had received mockery from both his classmates and his teacher. Ms. Parker heard the laughter but chose to ignore it, pretending not to notice. She thought it was harmless fun, the kind of teasing children would forget by tomorrow. But to Jamal, every laugh was a scar, a reminder that his voice meant nothing in a room full of doubters. The hours dragged on painfully. Each tick of the clock felt slower than the last. Jamal's notebook remained half empty, his pencil barely moving. All he could think about was how quickly things had spiraled from pride to humiliation. Near the end of the school day, the class was given some quiet reading time. The room was calm, but the quiet didn't bring Jamal peace. Instead, the silence made the whispers inside his own head louder. "They don't believe you. They think you're a liar. Even Ms. Parker laughed at you." He bit his lip, holding back the tears that threatened to escape. Some of the students still cast glances his way, nudging each other with smirks. For them, it was just a funny story, something to laugh about and tease. They didn't realize how heavy their words were. They didn't know how much it hurt to be doubted for telling the truth. And yet, despite the ridicule, a small spark of defiance remained inside Jamal. He knew his father's job was real. He had seen the badge, the files, the serious look on his father's face when he talked about protecting people. He knew the sacrifices his dad made every day. Jamal carried that truth like a secret shield, even though it felt invisible to everyone else. As the final bell approached, Jamal packed his things slowly, deliberately, avoiding eye contact with anyone. He felt defeated, but somewhere deep inside he also knew the day wasn't over yet. Something was going to happen. Something that would silence every laugh and prove once and for all that he hadn't lied. His classmates still whispered as they lined up by the door. "Agent Jamal," one boy snickered. "Maybe his dad is going to come pick him up in a helicopter." More laughter followed. Jamal ignored them, staring at the ground. But what none of them knew was that fate was already in motion. The very truth they mocked was about to walk straight through their classroom door. And when it did, the same voices that laughed would fall silent, and every smirk would vanish. The classmates who ridiculed him would soon realize they hadn't just laughed at a boy's words. They had laughed at the truth itself. The final bell of the day echoed through the school hallways, a signal of freedom that usually sent children racing toward the exits with laughter and relief. Backpacks zipped, chairs scraped against the floor, and the classroom filled with the familiar chaos of students eager to go home. But for Jamal, the bell didn't bring excitement. He felt only the heavy ache of humiliation. He quietly packed his books into his worn backpack, taking longer than usual so he wouldn't have to walk out with the others. Each movement felt slow, deliberate, like he was carrying the weight of the entire day inside that bag. Around him, classmates still whispered and chuckled, tossing mocking glances his way. "Agent Jamal," someone muttered with a smirk, sending another wave of laughter across the room. Jamal kept his eyes on his desk, pretending not to hear. He told himself over and over, ignore it. Just get through today. But no matter how hard he tried, the sting of betrayal wouldn't leave. He had told the truth and no one, not even his teacher, believed him. Ms. Parker stood at her desk, shuffling through papers. She glanced at Jamal and shook her head slightly, still convinced he had made up his story for attention. "Children will say anything to stand out," she muttered under her breath, though loud enough for a few students to hear. A couple of them giggled. The classroom door creaked open just then, and the sound cut through the noise like a blade. The laughter died down as everyone turned to see who it was. A tall man stepped inside, his presence commanding the room instantly. He was dressed sharply in a dark suit, his tie neatly knotted and polished shoes clicking against the linoleum floor. His expression was calm but serious, and his sharp eyes scanned the room with authority. The air seemed to grow heavier, as if the room itself understood someone important had arrived. In his hand, he carried a sleek black leather briefcase. At his side, a badge clipped to his belt caught the light, glinting just enough for the children in the front row to notice. Their eyes widened and whispers rippled across the room. "Who's that?" a girl whispered. "Looks like a government guy or something," another replied. Jamal's heart leaped in his chest. He recognized the broad shoulders, the steady walk, the quiet strength in every movement. His eyes lit up with relief, pride swelling inside him. "Dad." Ms. Parker blinked in surprise, momentarily thrown off by the unexpected visitor. She adjusted her glasses and cleared her throat. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, trying to sound composed, though there was a slight tremble in her voice. The man gave a small, polite nod. "Good afternoon. My name is Special Agent Williams. I'm here to pick up my son, Jamal." His voice was firm, steady, and filled with a kind of authority that made the room fall completely silent. The words hit the class like thunder. Every whisper, every giggle, every smirk froze in place. Heads turned toward Jamal, who sat at his desk, his face glowing with a mix of pride and relief. For the first time all day, he lifted his chin high, meeting the eyes of his classmates. Trevor, who had laughed the loudest earlier, swallowed hard. "Wait, his dad is really—" he whispered, but his voice trailed off as the reality sank in. Miss Parker's eyes widened. Her cheeks flushed crimson as she stared at the man standing before her. The badge clipped to his belt was unmistakable. The words he had spoken were unmistakable. Jamal hadn't been lying. He had been telling the truth all along. The silence in the room was so thick that even the ticking clock on the wall seemed louder. Every student stared at the man in awe, their earlier laughter now replaced with nervous glances and uneasy fidgeting. Agent Williams stepped further into the room, his gaze calm but piercing. "I understand there's been some confusion today," he said, his tone measured but firm. His eyes flicked toward Jamal, then back to the teacher. "My son told the truth. I am indeed an FBI agent, and I'm very proud of him for speaking honestly about who I am." Ms. Parker's throat went dry. She tried to speak, but only managed a faint, "Oh." She adjusted her glasses again, her usual confident posture faltering. For the first time in years of teaching, she felt completely unprepared for what to say. The students sat frozen, their earlier mockery crumbling into shame.
No one dared laugh now.
Instead, their eyes darted between Jamal and his father, struggling to process how badly they had misjudged him. Jamal stood slowly, his chest rising with pride. The humiliation he had carried all day melted away, replaced with a quiet strength. He walked toward his father, who rested a reassuring hand on his shoulder. In that moment, Jamal felt taller than he ever had before. Ms. Parker forced a weak smile, her voice trembling as she spoke. "Well, Jamal, I suppose I owe you an apology. I shouldn't have doubted you. Her words were clumsy, awkward, but filled with genuine regret. She realized now how carelessly she had dismissed him, how cruel her mockery had been. Agent Williams looked at her, his eyes steady but unreadable. Children deserve to be believed, Miss Parker, he said calmly, especially when they speak the truth. Dismissing them can do more damage than you realize. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Miss Parker nodded quickly, her face burning with embarrassment. The class remained silent, their earlier laughter now a memory they wished they could erase. Jamal looked around the room, his classmates' faces filled with regret. For once, there were no whispers, no giggles, no smirks, only silence. As father and son walked toward the door together, Jamal felt lighter than he had all day. He didn't need to say anything. The truth had spoken for itself. The same students who had mocked him now looked at him with wide eyes, some even with admiration. And though the classroom looked the same, the chalkboard, the desks, the posters on the walls, something had changed. The lesson that day had gone far beyond math problems or reading assignments. It was a lesson about respect, truth, and the danger of ridiculing someone without understanding. Jamal walked out with his father, his heart swelling with pride. For the first time that day he smiled. Not the shy smile he usually wore, but a proud, confident one. Behind him, the silence of the classroom lingered. The students would not forget this moment, and neither would Ms. Parker. The classroom door clicked softly as Agent Williams stood beside his son, his tall frame filling the room with quiet authority. The students still hadn't recovered from the shock of seeing him, their eyes darting between the shiny badge on his belt and the proud expression on Jamal's face. What had started as a day of mockery had turned into something no one could have predicted. For Ms. Parker, the moment felt surreal. She stood frozen at her desk, her palms resting flat against the stack of ungraded papers. Her throat felt dry and her heartbeat pounded louder than the tick of the classroom clock. Just hours earlier, she had laughed at Jamal's words, dismissed him in front of his peers, and encouraged the very ridicule that now hung heavy in the air. Her eyes locked onto the badge clipped neatly to Agent Williams's belt. There was no mistaking it. The golden letters glinted under the fluorescent lights, undeniable proof of what Jamal had claimed. The weight of realization hit her like a stone. She had ridiculed a child for telling the truth. Ms. Parker tried to gather her composure, but her voice betrayed her. I had no idea, she stammered softly, her gaze shifting between father and son. Jamal, the word stuck in her throat. How could she apologize in front of the whole class when she had been the loudest voice of doubt? The students sat silently, their earlier laughter now haunting them. They watched Ms. Parker, waiting to see how she would respond. For the first time, the authority she carried so confidently every day seemed fragile, shaken by her own misjudgment. Agent Williams didn't raise his voice, but his words cut sharper than any reprimand. Children trust their teachers, he said steadily. When my son spoke, he expected respect, not laughter. Mockery from peers is painful, but mockery from an adult he looks up to, that cuts even deeper. The silence grew heavier. Ms. Parker's cheeks flushed red, her chest tightening with guilt. She thought about the way Jamal's shoulders had slumped when she laughed, the way he had gone quiet for the rest of the day, the way the other students had followed her lead. She hadn't just doubted him, she had taught the class to doubt him too. Her mind raced back to the moment she had smirked and said, "At least your math is more believable than your stories." The words replayed in her head like an echo, and this time they sounded cruel, heartless, nothing like the playful teasing she had convinced herself it was. She felt sick to her stomach. Jamal stood proudly beside his father now, and Ms. Parker noticed the difference in his posture. The shy boy who had kept his head down most of the day was standing tall, his chin lifted, his eyes filled with quiet strength. He wasn't the same boy who had been laughed at hours earlier. He had been vindicated, and she was the one who had to face the truth. The students shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some looked at Jamal with admiration, others with guilt. A few avoided eye contact altogether, ashamed of their part in the ridicule, but all of them shared the same thought. The teacher had been wrong. Ms. Parker swallowed hard and finally forced herself to speak. "Jamal," she said, her voice softer than anyone had ever heard it. "I owe you an apology. I should never have doubted you, and I should never have laughed. That was wrong of me." Her words trembled in the air, fragile but sincere. The students stared wide-eyed. Teachers didn't usually admit mistakes, not in front of the whole class. But there was no other way to fix what had been broken. Jamal looked at her for a long moment. His expression was calm, but his eyes carried the memory of everything he had endured that day. He gave a small nod, acknowledging her apology, though the hurt couldn't be erased so easily. Agent Williams placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder and turned back to Ms. Parker. "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong," he said. "But what matters most is what we do next. These children learn more from our actions than our words." The weight of his statement settled over Ms. Parker like a heavy blanket. She realized that her classroom, usually her place of control and authority, had become a stage where she had displayed the worst example of judgment. And now she had to make it right, not just for Jamal but for every student who had watched the scene unfold. She looked at the rest of the class, their young faces waiting silently. "Class," she said, her voice stronger now. "I was wrong to laugh at Jamal. I set a bad example by not believing him, and that encouraged all of you to mock him too. That wasn't fair. I hope you can all learn from my mistake because everyone deserves respect no matter what." The students nodded slowly, some shifting in their chairs with shame. Trevor, who had mocked Jamal the most, stared at the floor wishing he could disappear. For Ms. Parker, the shock of the moment lingered like a weight pressing on her chest. She had always thought of herself as a fair teacher, someone who cared for her students. But today she had learned the hard way that even adults could let pride and prejudice cloud their judgment. And the cost had been her students' dignity. As Agent Williams guided Jamal toward the door, the teacher watched them go, her heart heavy with regret. She knew this was a moment she would never forget. Long after the day ended, long after the classroom was empty, she would still hear the echo of her own laughter, a painful reminder of the lesson she had learned too late. The image of Jamal standing proudly beside his father would stay with her forever. And with it, the knowledge that a single careless moment could wound deeply, but also that humility and honesty were the only path toward redemption. The classroom was still heavy with silence after Jamal and his father had stunned everyone with the truth. The students who just hours ago had laughed so loudly now sat frozen, staring at the floor, their faces pale with embarrassment. Ms. Parker's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of her desk, her eyes fixed on the man standing in front of the room. Agent Williams didn't raise his voice, but his presence commanded attention. The quiet power in his words filled the space more than any shouting could. He looked around the classroom, making eye contact with each student before speaking. "Children," he began calmly, "today you all laughed at someone who told you the truth. You didn't just doubt my son, you mocked him. And when a person is mocked for telling the truth, it doesn't just hurt them, it teaches them that honesty is dangerous." The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights above. Every child shifted uneasily in their seat, the weight of his words pressing down on them. Agent Williams rested a hand on Jamal's shoulder. "Do you know how much courage it takes for a child to speak proudly about their family?" His voice grew deeper, more serious. "My son looks up to me. He trusts me. And when he told you who I was, he spoke with pride. But instead of respect, he was met with laughter. Even from the very person meant to protect him in this classroom." Ms. Parker lowered her eyes, her face burning with shame. Jamal stood still beside his father, his small frame straight and strong. Agent Williams continued, "Every one of you here learned a lesson today, whether you realize it or not. You learned how easy it is to follow the crowd, to laugh when others laugh, even if it means hurting someone. You learned how quickly you can judge a person's words without thinking twice. But I want you to learn something more important than that." He paused, letting the silence stretch long enough that the students leaned forward, waiting. "You must never underestimate the truth," he said firmly, "and you must never ridicule someone for speaking it, because you don't always know who they are, what they carry, or how important their story might be." Trevor, who had been the loudest mocker, swallowed hard. He could still hear his own cruel jokes echoing in his head. Superman dad, FBI agent, alien hunter. Now, sitting under Agent Williams' sharp gaze, those words felt heavy, shameful, like weights pressing on his chest. Agent Williams' eyes swept the room again. "Some of you thought it was funny to laugh at my son, but let me ask you this. Would it still be funny if you were the one being mocked? If you told the truth and no one believed you? If the person you trusted most in this classroom, your teacher, laughed in your face? A few students squirmed in their seats, unable to look him in the eye. He let the question hang, then added, "Mockery is easy. Respect is harder. But it's respect that makes us better people." Jamal looked up at his father with shining eyes. For the first time that day, he felt the classroom shift in his favor. His classmates were no longer smirking, they were listening. And some even looked guilty. Ms. Parker finally found her voice. "You're right," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I failed to protect Jamal. I should have believed him. I let my own doubts turn into mockery, and I set the wrong example for the class. I'm deeply sorry." Her words hung heavy, and though her apology was sincere, the shame in her eyes told everyone how deeply the moment had struck her. Agent Williams nodded slightly. "Admitting a mistake is the first step," he said. "But what matters most is what you do after. Children learn not by what we say, but by what we show. Today you have the chance to show Jamal and each other that respect matters." He turned toward the students again. "Every one of you owes Jamal more than silence. You owe him the respect you denied him, the respect every person deserves when they speak the truth." The classroom was still, the air thick with tension. Then slowly, one by one, the students turned toward Jamal. A small voice spoke first. It was Lila, the girl who had laughed earlier. "I'm sorry, Jamal," she said softly, her face flushed. "I shouldn't have laughed. I believe you." Another voice followed, this time Marcus, his best friend who had abandoned him at lunch. His guilt was written all over his face. "I should have sat with you, Jamal. I'm sorry too." Trevor shifted uncomfortably, his pride making it hard to speak. But under Agent Williams' piercing stare, he finally muttered, "I shouldn't have made fun of you. I was wrong." The apologies spread around the room, each one softer than the last, but together they built a chorus of regret. Jamal stood quietly, listening, his heart swelling with a mix of emotions. Relief, pride, and forgiveness. Agent Williams gave his son a small nod, silently telling him to accept their words. Jamal looked around at his classmates, then gave a simple reply. "Thank you," he said softly. The atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension that had hung so heavily began to lift, replaced with something new: respect. Jamal wasn't just the quiet boy in the back of the room anymore. He was the boy who had stood tall in the face of doubt, the boy whose truth had silenced an entire class. Agent Williams gave one last glance at the room. "Remember this," he said firmly. "Respect is not optional. It is something you owe to every person, no matter who they are. And when someone tells you something, don't rush to laugh or doubt. Take the time to listen. You never know how much courage it took for them to speak." The words settled deep in the students' hearts, a lesson far stronger than any they had ever learned from a textbook. Even Ms. Parker, who had spent years teaching others, realized that she had just been taught the most important lesson of her career. As Agent Williams guided Jamal toward the door, the class sat in silence, reflecting on the day's events. For the first time, the silence wasn't filled with guilt or shame, it was filled with thought. Real thought. Jamal walked taller, his pride restored, his heart lighter. The boy who had been laughed at in the morning left the classroom as someone different, someone respected, someone heard. And in that silence, every child and every adult knew one thing for certain. This was a lesson they would never forget. The classroom felt different after Agent Williams' words. The air, once filled with laughter and mockery, now carried something heavier: reflection. The students sat in silence, their faces thoughtful, their eyes lowered. For the first time that day, not a single whisper, not a single chuckle echoed in the room. Ms. Parker stood at the front of the class, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. She had spent years teaching children to respect one another, to be honest, and to always act with kindness. But today she had failed in all three. Worse, she had failed not just as a teacher, but as an example. She had ridiculed a child who trusted her, laughed at a truth she should have defended, and encouraged others to do the same. The image of Jamal standing proudly beside his father burned in her mind. The badge, the authority, the truth, all of it replayed over and over. But what hurt most wasn't the badge. It was the memory of Jamal's face when she had laughed. The way his eyes had dropped, the way his shoulders had slumped, the way his voice had gone quiet. That moment haunted her now more than anything else. She adjusted her glasses, her hands trembling slightly. She knew she couldn't let the day end without doing more than just a quick apology. She needed to redeem herself, not only in Jamal's eyes but in the eyes of every student who had seen her mistake. "Class," she said finally, her voice softer than usual, but steady. Dozens of young eyes looked up at her, waiting. Today something very important happened, and I don't mean the lesson on fractions or reading. I mean a lesson that's far bigger than school. A lesson about life. She walked slowly to the center of the room, her heels clicking against the floor. When Jamal spoke about his father, I doubted him. Worse, I mocked him. I told myself it was harmless, but it wasn't. It hurt him. It hurt this classroom, and it set a terrible example for all of you. The students shifted uneasily, their guilt still fresh. "I want every single one of you to understand this," Ms. Parker continued, her voice firmer now. "It doesn't matter if a story sounds strange or surprising or even unbelievable. What matters is that you respect the person who tells it. You listen first. You don't laugh. You don't assume they're lying. Because when you do, you don't just disrespect their words, you disrespect them." Jamal listened quietly, his hands folded in front of him. For the first time since morning, he felt seen. Ms. Parker turned toward him, her eyes heavy with regret. "Jamal," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I want to say this not just in front of the class, but to you directly. I was wrong. I doubted you. I embarrassed you. And I hurt you. I am deeply sorry." The class was silent. It wasn't the usual kind of classroom silence. This silence carried weight, the kind that sinks into your bones and lingers, the kind you remember. Jamal's eyes softened as he looked at her. He could still feel the sting of the morning's laughter, but he also felt the honesty in her words. He nodded once, slowly accepting her apology, but Ms. Parker wasn't done. She turned back to the class. "I want all of you to remember what you saw today. Remember how easy it was to laugh at someone just because their truth didn't sound like yours. Remember how quickly the room filled with mockery. And then remember how wrong it felt when the truth came out." The students nodded silently. The guilt on their faces was clear, but so was something else. Understanding. "From this day on," Ms. Parker said firmly, "this classroom will be different. We will not laugh at someone for being honest. We will not ridicule someone for telling their truth. We will respect one another no matter what. That is the rule, and that is the lesson I've learned today, too." Her words carried more power than any lecture she had given before. The students sat straighter, their young minds soaking in every word. For the first time all day, Jamal felt proud, not just of his father, but of himself. His honesty, his courage had sparked a change. Agent Williams, who had remained silent watching, gave a small nod of approval. He could see the shift happening in the room, the seed of respect being planted. His eyes softened as he looked down at Jamal. Pride radiated from him, but so did relief. His son had endured something painful, but he had come out stronger and had taught an entire classroom a lesson in the process. The dismissal bell finally rang, echoing through the halls. Usually it sent students racing out the door, eager to escape. But today no one rushed. They packed their bags quietly, glancing at Jamal with something new in their eyes. Not ridicule, not doubt, but respect. A few even offered small smiles as they passed him, a silent acknowledgement of the truth they had once laughed at. Trevor, the loudest mocker, lingered at the door. He shuffled his feet, his face red with shame. "Hey, Jamal," he muttered awkwardly, not meeting his eyes. I really am sorry. For real." Then he hurried away, unable to face the weight of his own actions any longer. Jamal stood a little taller as he walked out with his father, his backpack slung over his shoulder. The whispers that had followed him all day were gone. In their place was silence, and silence this time felt like victory. As Ms. Parker watched them leave, her chest tightened with both guilt and gratitude. She knew she would never forget this day. It had exposed her flaws, humbled her pride, and taught her a lesson more valuable than any she had ever taught her students. She had failed once, but now she had the chance to grow, and she silently promised herself she would never make the same mistake again. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky with warm orange and pink hues. Jamal walked beside his father, his heart lighter than it had been in the morning. The day had been long and painful, but it had ended with something powerful: respect. And in the quiet of that walk home, one truth shined brighter than ever. No matter how loud the laughter, the truth will always stand tall.